On the morning of April 19th, 2019, engineers at Belarusian refinery made a discovery that would trigger the biggest oil supply crisis in Europe in decades. The crude oil flowing through the Druzhba pipeline, the world's longest trunk oil pipeline system, stretching over 5,000 kilometers, was poisoned. And nobody knew it. Within this, 1 million barrels per day of Russian crude exports had ground to a halt. Refineries across Poland, Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic began burning through their emergency reserves. This is the story of how a fraudulent scheme at a tiny metering station in the Samara region of Russia set off a geopolitical and economic domino effect that stretched all the way to the boardrooms of trading giants like Vitol, Glencore, and Trafigura. To understand the scale of this crisis, you first need to understand what the Druzhba pipeline actually is. The word Druzhba is Russian for friendship. It was invented by Soviet countries in Eastern Europe with cheap Russian fuel, and for over half a century it has done exactly that, quietly reliable with barely a headline to its name. The pipeline originates in Elmstik in Tatarstan, deep in the Volga region of Russia. It runs roughly 1.500 kilometers west to the Mozhary refinery in Belarus. There it splits into two branches. The northern branches feeds refinery in Poland, Flok and Gdansk, and Germany at Suzdal and Luna. The southern branch supplies Hungary's Duna refinery, Solvay's Bratislava plant, whose is refineries at Lithuania and Kralupy. Combined, the refinery capacity of European plants connected to Druzhba exceeds 1.8 million barrels per day. Most of the feedstock arrives through this single outlet. That is the definition of a critical infrastructure and critical vulnerability. The containment discovered on April 19th was identified as dichloroethane, an organic chloride compound. Under normal temperature, dichloroethane poses no immediate danger to pipelines, but once this oil reaches in refinery and gets heated above 200 degrees Celsius, as it must during the refining process, chlorides undergo a chemical reaction. They form hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is one of the most corrosive substances known to industrial chemistry. It eats through refinery equipment. It destroys catalysts. It can cause catastrophic failures that take months and hundreds of millions of dollars to repair. The Russian pipeline operator Transport sets a maximum allowable concentration of 10 parts per million of organic solids. Belarusian tests taken between April 9th and 2nd show concentration of 150 to 330 parts per million, up to 33 times above the legal limit. At those levels, the oil is completely unsalable. No refinery can touch it without risking serious equipment damage. The only solution is to dilute it massively with a clean crew, and that is for easier said than done with the millions of tons of it are already flowing through a 5,000-kilometer pipeline system. The first alarm came from Gomel Transport, the variation operator of the Druzhba pipeline. They immediately notified their counterparts in Poland and Ukraine. By April 2nd, tests at Adumovo in Poland confirmed chloride concentration 30 times above normal. Poland state pipeline operator were suspended all crude flow via Druzhba to protect domestic refineries. By April 25th, Ukraine's operator Ukhristpa had also suspended flow on the southern branch. Both legs of the entire Druzhba network were now flanked. But contaminated oil had already moved further. It was found in Belarus, Poland, Germany, Ukraine, and crucially at the ballistic export terminal of UST Luga, a major Russian port near St. Petersburg. At least 10 tankers had already sailed from UST Luga loaded with contaminated crude, a combined cargo of roughly 1 million tons bound for trading companies across Europe. Reuters reported that as late as April 29, chloride levels at Ust-Luga were still at 80 parts per million, 8 times above the maximum. The contamination was not a content spill, it was systemic. Here is where the story gets genuinely murky. Transparent. The Russian state pipeline giant operating over 8,400 kilometers of strong pipelines identified the contamination source as a small collection venting station in the Samara region. Along the Samara Pinsa section of the pipeline, the station was owned by the same company called Petrofervilka, registered with a character capital of just 10,000 rubles, less than 150 US dollars. This company collected crude delivered by trucks from our small independent producer, checked its quality, and injected it into the transport system. Allegedly quietly checked it hit this station were either being skipped entirely or conducted only sporadically. The Russia Federal Security Service, the FSB, opened a criminal investigation transcript called ETF fraudulent scheme. On theory, reported by a local Samara news portal, is that clean crude from a metering station tanks was quietly sold off to a refinery. The missing volumes were then replaced with the chlorodominated oil brought in by trucks under forged documents. Second theory raised by former ex-chief Mikhail Podolskaya is that organic chlorides use enhanced oil recovery, a process that had been permitted in Russia since 2012 were never properly removed from the crude before it entered the pipeline system. A third theory came from Gaziprov's chief of strategy that dichloromethane used to clean well bore blockages was accidentally or negligently fed into the pipeline via contaminated oil that should have been drained into waste pit. What was instead solid on through multiple intermediaries. and eventually trucked to the Samara metering station. None of these theories have been conclusively proven. What is certain is that the self-polishing quality system that transmit had relied on for 27 years had catastrophically failed. As the full scale of the crisis became apparent, President Vladimir Putin personally summoned Transfit CEO Nicolo Tokarev to the Kremlin on April 30. The meeting transcript was revealing when Tokarev described the incident as a fraudulent act and explained that quality checks had been outsourced to private companies. Putin reportedly fired back dogs transferred control to all the quality of oil that enters into the system. He's verified. Someone did the fraud. What it is us who are going to deal with the damage. Monetary and reputational. The system of self-control failed. The system must be changed. On the technical side, the recovery process was grueling. Chlorides cannot simply be filtered out of a crude oil. The only solution is dilution, mixing contaminated oil with a large volume of a clean crude until concentration fall below 10 parts per million. This requires enormous tank farm capacity and takes months. Russia and Belarus agreed on a phased plan whose contained crude into holding tanks at the Majuro refinery and the Russia-Belarus border crossing at Nza. Then flow clean crude from Russia to gradually resume operation. On May 4th, clean oil arrived at Majuro on May 6th. The refinery potentially resumed operations. On May 4th, as tank valves filled and export flow backed up, Transport took into extraordinary step. It asked Russian oil companies to voluntarily cut production by 10% for several days to relieve pressure on the system. The economic damage from the Druzhba contamination incident is difficult to fully quantify, but certain impacts are clear. For European refineries, particularly the so-called captive refineries in Central and Eastern Europe with no easy access to seaborne crude. The crisis for an emergency favored alternative supplies at much bigger cost. Refineries that typically bought Druzhba discount suddenly face petroleum plus prices when sourcing seaborne oil via ballistic ports. For the trading companies holding contaminated tankers from West Indies, Total Vitol, Glencore, Trafigura, among others. The question of who bears the cost of storage, dilution, and any resulting losses remain deeply unresolved at the time of our writing. For Russia, the reef potential damage was significant. The Druzhba pipeline had been one of the most quietly reliable energy factories in the world for over 5 decades. This incident was the first crude quality failure of this scale in Transfist 27-year history. There is a notable irony. At the time of the crisis, the global storage of medium sour crude grades had pushed Urals crude to a premium over Brent, a rare reversal. In the 5 years prior, Urals had earned at the average $1.76 per barrel discount to Brent. In April 2019, it was briefly commanding a premium. The contamination crisis, therefore, it hits Russia exports at precisely the moment they were earning record premiums. The Druzhba contamination crisis of 2019 is more than a story about bad oil and criminal fraud. It is a case study in the fragility of energy infrastructure that appears invulnerable until it suddenly is not. A multi-trillion dollar supply chain serving dozens of refineries across 6 countries and hundreds of million consumers was disrupted by what appears to have been a small-scale scam at a metering station with a registered capital of $150. The systemic lesson is stuck. The transmission model of delegating quality control to the very producer whose crude it transports, assuming they would sell policy because the consequences of a failure would be costly, proved dangerously in, inadequate. For European policymakers and energy executives, the incident raises a question that has not fully been answered. How defended is too defended on a single supplier via a single pipeline route? Diversifying supply reduces supply risks but increases price risks. As the acquisition cost for landlocked Central European refineries rises substantially. But increases price risks as the acquisition cost of landlocked Central European refineries rises sustainability. The Druzhba pipeline continues to flow today, but the trust it once carried as automatic and individual as oil itself will take far longer to restore than the pipeline did. If this breakdown helped you understand the real mechanism of global energy risks, like, share, and subscribe.